Hi, everyone. Welcome to Perennia's 8th webinar of the Take Your Product to Market series provided to you by the Agri-Food Funding Program. Today, we will be learning about sustainability in the food industry. My name is Emily Page, and I'm a food scientist with Perennia Food and Agriculture. We are Nova Scotia's only development agency with a focus on agriculture and seafood. We offer services in food safety, agriculture extension, mobile wine bottling, and analytical testing of cannabis, foods, and beverages. Here at the Perennia Food and Beverage Innovation Center, we work with clients on product development, process improvement, nutritional labeling, and shelf life determination. First, I would like to introduce our guest presenter today, Peter Chapman of SKUFood. Peter understands the food industry, and he works hard to figure out where it is going. Peter's experience includes both sides of the desk. Prior to working with suppliers and launching SKUFood, Peter worked for 19 years with Canada's largest food retailer, Loblaw. He is committed to using this experience to help producers and processors understand retailers and consumers. Peter has also provided many food industry insights to Canadian Grocer, The Globe and Mail, Maclean's Magazine, and Canada AM. In today's session, Peter will discuss what is happening with packaging, food waste, and some of the different options we see in retail. He will also share what you need to be telling your customers and consumers about your accomplishments and how you can differentiate your products. Lastly, just a couple quick notes for using Zoom webinars. If you have a question during the session, please use the Q&A button, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom window. I will be monitoring the questions throughout the webinar for Peter, which can be answered during the presentation, so please submit them as they come up. We will also have a quick Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel on the Take Your Product to Market playlist, so you can replay it later or catch up on any of the other webinars you may have missed. Let's get started. I will pass it off to you, Peter.
All right, thanks very much, Emily, and excited to be here to talk about a very interesting topic in our food industry, sustainability. And it's one of those things that has been around for a long time. And it also is one of those things where the importance of it, or the weight that consumers and customers put on it, it does vary. And so we're going to chat about a little bit of that up front and dive into some of the content. So what we're going to talk about, which Emily already did share with you a little bit, is just we're going to talk about some of the issues around food waste in our industry. We're going to talk about the production and processing and how we're seeing things in sustainability impacting it. And I'm not the expert on helping you implement sustainability within production and processing, but what I want to talk about is where we see it helping to sell and helping to build relationships with customers. And then we're going to talk about packaging, which is such a huge issue. It's a challenge. It's an opportunity. It's a lot of things. But and I found this photo from BC, which I thought was very interesting because we really have to. It's a lot of education about sustainability. And when you look at these bins, and we've all seen them in many places, but the message on there that bins don't sort recycling, you do. Trying to put more of the onus on the consumer to not just throw something in and expect somebody else to figure out what to do with it. So I think it's an interesting message, and one that we have to keep in mind as we talk about sustainability. And we know that in 2019 that there was a lot of focus on sustainability around the world. We had a lot of attention from especially younger people about the importance of the planet and how some of the practices of either government or industry or just people in general are having an impact. And it definitely raised the issue of sustainability and made it more in people's face. And when you look at it, it was one of the top issues in the Canadian election in 2019. It was definitely something that got a lot of focus. We know consumers are demanding change, but one of the challenges with that is that they may not be very well informed, and they see things and want to react to them. And an example might be the grocery bags, where it's something that they see every week when they go to the grocery store, and there's a demand to say, we got to stop doing this, but they may not have the best information to really make the decision about what is the right solution. And it's so complicated. So I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying that we have to be aware that sometimes we're going to be influenced by consumers who don't have all the answers. And we do also have to keep in mind that when consumers demand change, customers, being retailers or food service operators and or politicians, will respond. And that's something that is not always in our control. So we have to watch and we have to listen to see what those trends are out there, so that we're ready as an industry to react, or even to be proactive. And the education piece, I believe in sustainability, we have to focus on consumers, we have to focus on customers, and we also have to focus on politicians, because they do make decisions which can impact industry. So those three different groups have an impact on what industry does. So we have to keep trying to educate and make sure people can make well-informed decisions. So let's dive into food waste. And this graphic for me, which was on the cover of Maclean's magazine, does a great job of explaining it. I think that there's no doubt that you can argue the numbers a little bit, but the reality is that we know in Canada, over $30 billion worth of food is produced and not consumed. And when consumers start to hear that and see it within their own home, they demand change. And it's interesting for me when you look and try to understand where in the value chain we see food waste. And we see probably 1/5 of it, or 20%, happens in the manufacturing and processing stage. And that's not to say that the people, that the businesses or people at that part of the value chain are wasting, but it's some of the standards that they're expected to meet. It could be conditions in which they're operating, environment. There's so many factors that can impact it. So we just have to make sure that people understand what some of those are. 10% of it happens in grocery stores, and that shrink number, which if I go back to my Loblaw days, that was a huge focus. And you can imagine in a retailer, if their annual sales are $25 billion, 10% of that is $2.5 billion worth of product that they're paying for and not selling. So it's a huge number, and some would look at it as a huge opportunity to try to tackle. So you can see where the waste happens, and also it's very important to see that half of it, close to half of it, happens with consumers. So as industry, we have to figure out what to do about that. Another thing that's important for you to know is that all of the major food retailers in Canada, with the exception of Costco, have made the commitment to reduce food waste by 50% by 2025. And you can see also that there's some big consumer packaged goods companies in there in terms of Kraft and Maple Leaf and Unilever. So this is a big commitment that they've made, and they're doing things within their operations, but I can also tell you that they will be expecting suppliers to come to the table on this issue. And the challenges that we're facing right now with the coronavirus are having an impact on food waste, I think, in different ways. I think that in some respects, people are being much more conscious of it because they feel they don't have as much money as they did. And also we're seeing, that there was a huge shift from food service, away from food service. So there was probably definitely some waste when that happened. So there are definitely some changes happening in the business environment that impact this, but at the end of the day, they still made this commitment that they would reduce food waste by 50%, which is a big number. So let's talk about some of the things that we see happening in the market to impact it. So one thing is packaging, package size and format. And when you see products like this come along, where a produce supplier, Sunset, is, really their aim in business has always been to grow tomatoes and sell them, but now they're packaging them in a different way so that the consumer has a full pasta salad with the fresh tomatoes. And instead of forcing the consumer to buy 1 pound or 2 pounds of the tomatoes, we're just giving them the amount they need to make that pasta salad. So in effect, there should be no food waste. the salad is the size that people want to buy. So it's a way to try to address some of that. Another thing that we see is finding the right size package. And you see some blueberries from Nature Right that are really what I would call a single serve pack, as opposed to having people buy a pint or a 2-pound clamshell or whatever the size of blueberries that we see through the different seasons. But it's really about, is this the right size for the consumer? And we've all looked in our fridge and looked at a pint or a bigger clamshell of blueberries and said, oh, we didn't eat them all when we should have, and now they're no good. So what they're trying to do is say, here, you buy 4 and you, or 3 or whatever the package is, and the consumer gets that right size home, you eat them all and eliminate the waste. Now, on the flip side, you could say there's more packaging. So it's such a complicated issue to find the right ultimate answer. And another trend we're seeing in food is a shift actually back to more bulk. And you know, potatoes, which was a category which, if I go back to my days in the store, was 20-pound bags of potatoes in the store. Then it shifted to 10-pound bags. And now we're seeing, especially in Western Canada, where significant portions of the category are purchased in bulk. So this is the consumer coming in and buying the amount they want and taking it home. So that shift and in consumer buying, where they're saying, I don't want the packaging, or I want to only buy what I need because I don't need 10 pounds, so I'm only going to buy 3 pounds and I'm going to consume them all. Those are the kind of things that we're seeing shifts in the market happening. And it's interesting because it's definitely a different buying decision. We're also seeing sort of initiatives, I guess, to reduce food waste, where what I like to call shelf life and home life. And my definition of that, shelf life for me is how long it lasts once it gets to the retailer, but then home life is how long it lasts for the consumer. And for me, working with clients, I'm always trying to understand both, because we have 2 masters to satisfy. So we need to ensure that the product is going to sell through the retail side of the business before the best before date, because if it doesn't, then it shrinks to the retailer. And then also that it's going to get consumed and the product is going to last at home for that consumer and perform the way that it should. So I think there's a lot of initiatives going on to try to give the retailer and the consumer more time to be able to either purchase or consume the product. But we also have to remember that we can't sacrifice quality in that. And consumers are more demanding than ever, probably, on that front. They know what they want and they go after it. So we have to find solutions which will give us more time without sacrificing the quality, especially if you need a premium. And this is a category where I think there's so much room for innovation, because we're food waste, you know, selling exactly the amount of mini potatoes that 4 people need in a package that has the right atmosphere to give us the best shelf life, to maintain the best quality. It can be a great impulse sale. And so things to reduce food waste like that really can have an impact on sales, because that's what people are looking for. They don't want to feel like they're buying too much, that they're going to throw product out. So they're looking for those right size options for them. And another point about food waste is that because consumers are interested in it and focused on it, it sells. And you can see some examples of packaging where people are promoting the fact of what they're doing with products that might previously have not made it to market. So we have Griffin's Affordable Adorables, which are potatoes which would not have been packed for table stock before, which are now at retail. We see Loblaw with their No Name Naturally Imperfect program, where, you know, in the past, we used to say some products would move to processing if they didn't meet some of the standards for retail. But now it's really almost a sales tactic to say these berries or whatever it is that they're putting into their smoothie mix would not have been made it for retail, but now we're going to sell them to you as No Name Naturally Imperfect. So consumers are now gravitating to that because they're saying, hey, I'm doing a good thing that might have not made it before. And the third product there, the Rubies in the Rubble, is a product from the UK And the reason I wanted to share that one with you is I just love their approach. Their products are all made from fruits and vegetables, which are picked up from produce sellers that are not suitable for sale at retail, and they're what they would call repurposed into these different chutneys and sauces and that kind of thing. And I just love their tagline when I read about them, and their tagline is that it's a taste test, not a beauty contest. And I think that's a great way to try to promote products that might not have made it to market, or were at market, didn't sell, and they get repurposed. So just for me, it was a great example of somebody taking something and using an issue like food waste and trying to turn it into a sales opportunity. And also, we do understand that the retailers are on this issue. So Loblaw and some of the other chains have their own version of this as well. But this is an app that was developed where the retailer, when they take product off the shelf that's not suitable for sale at retail anymore at full price, we used to see the reduced rack. We've all seen that in a produce department, or reduced, for quick sale, that kind of thing. But now what they're trying to do through this app is making the information available to consumers before they go to the store. So if you download this app on your phone and you shop at a particular store in a particular market, you can look before you go to get your groceries and see what they're offering that's reduced. And the philosophy is, if they make it more aware, then consumers will pick up the product and make it part of their shopping that week. So it's another way to try to reduce the amount of food that's heading to the garbage or to the compost. So there are different initiatives underway in different stages of the value chain. And I think it's important from a producer and processor perspective that there could be opportunities to increase marketable yield when we educate the other people in the value chain that, say, product that in the past was too small, now it will fit the stand. If we could get people to take a look at those standards, it could be perfectly good product, but it didn't meet a specific size spec. And so I think that everybody is more entertaining to those conversations. It doesn't mean they're going to change 100%, but they will entertain those conversations. And if we can increase marketable yield, then that means we're going to reduce food waste, which is a good thing. Now, on the flip side of that, I also want to make sure that people always understand that the retailers are looking at this issue as a complete value chain issue. So in the past, if your shrink, which was incorporated in your cost of goods, was based on a 75% pack out, and now they're going to allow perhaps a better pack out because they're going to take more smaller ones or more bigger ones or whatever, then I would assume they're going to come back to you and say, hey, you know what? Your cost used to be predicated on a 75% pack out. Now it's an 85% pack out. What does that do so that we can look at the product cost? So I think that's always something that you have to have an answer for. I'm not saying that it has to reduce your costs, but I'm just saying that it's a question that you could be asked, and you need to be prepared to answer that question, because it's probably a fair question. So Emily, maybe we'll take a pause there on as we're going through food waste, and just see if anybody's got any questions that they want to ask about that topic before we move on to the food waste, or sorry, sustainability in production and processing.
There's no questions yet, so I think we're good to move on to the next part. So listeners, please feel free to submit your questions whenever you think of them, because we're going to pause a couple times for questions.
Yep, for sure. All right, well, we'll keep going and dive into production and processing. So, and again, as I said at the beginning, I'm not an expert in helping you improve sustainability in your production and processing practices, but what I want to do is share some of the things I see happening in that arena, and then how we see them turning into opportunities. So one of the obvious ones certainly is inputs, and it's such a complicated sort of value chain to produce and process food that there's all kinds of things that a lot of people use. And so I think it's looking at those inputs through that sustainable lens. And it can be how much of certain things you use, like water. It also can be even the packaging that they come in. So if you're using chemicals or ingredients or different things in your production and processing, are you pushing the other way on the supply chain to say, hey, your packaging is not either recyclable or sustainable or compostable or whatever it could be? Because I think we all have a responsibility at our point in the value chain, and we shouldn't leave it all just to the consumer or just to the customer. We need to push back on our end as well. So you need to make sure that you are looking at those kind of things. Another thing we're seeing is a lot of shifts to controlled environment production. And there's a number of reasons for this happening. One is the climate is changing and we're trying to adapt to that. The customers are becoming more and more demanding on continuity of supply. They want to get whatever product there is that they're ordering when they order it, and moving to a more of a controlled environment eliminates some of the variability. We're also seeing different yields. So from an input versus output perspective, we're able to control the amount of water. We're able to control the amount of fertilizer and nutrients that we're using to help with some of that. So, and obviously, I mean, greenhouse production is not a new thing, but we're seeing different crops produced under some form of cover. And it doesn't always have to be a sophisticated gutter connect greenhouse. It can be less sophisticated as well. So controlled environment for sure, impacting production and processing. Another thing is crop rotation. Good stewardship of the land is something that is important, but it also comes at a cost, because it's probably, again, I'm not an expert, but I would think it's probably simpler to just keep growing the same thing in the same field year after year. But if we're destroying the land or maybe reducing the output that we can get from that land, then it's probably not the right thing to do. So certainly it's a very complicated piece in crop rotation, and one that a lot of people don't understand the impact of it on your business and what you have to do. So it's one thing that's been going on for a long time, and there's varying levels of complexity, but it's something that we probably need to educate more about. And another thing is what the change in your inputs have on your product cost. So if this year, and I took this photo just a couple of weeks ago, I think that the price of gas is actually cheaper now than it was even then. But if one of your initiatives this year was to reduce the amount of fuel that you're using, given a depressed price for that commodity right now, the benefit of reducing that is not going to be as great as what you had perhaps anticipated. So you need to factor that into your cost. And if you're using an input that is perhaps a little more expensive, but better from a sustainability perspective, then you need to educate your customers about what you're doing on that front. Because if you're just trying to recoup a cost increase without explaining why, then you're going to have a bigger challenge. But if you say to them, well, I've moved to this type of an input because it has a better impact on the environment, or for any reasons that are related to sustainability, then it's easier for you to justify and explain the impact that it had on your cost. And we also have a lot of sustainability issues impacting labor. So the type of environment that they're being asked to work in, and some of the different practices that we're asking people to do definitely have an impact. So you need to think through those things. How do your decisions on sustainability impact labor? And another thing, which I think as we talk about, kind of shift the conversation from what's happening to what we see or what we're going to have to do about it, is I do believe that we're going to see more and more retailers and food service distributors pushing for audits related to sustainability. And I think we've always had this, or not always, sorry, we've had a shift where retailers and food service distributors are mandating that food safety audits need to be conducted, and that's pretty much accepted and part of the rules of the game, we'll call it. And we're seeing more now where we're going to see shifts to audits about sustainability as well. So it could be working conditions for employees. It could be how you do your production and processing in terms of sustainability practices, how you procure product, ingredients, inputs, that kind of thing. So I believe we're going to see more and more of that coming in the near future. So when you're doing all these things, which I appreciate can complicate the business or change how you have to do business, I think you really have to remember how important it is to tell your story and share that story with customers and consumers. So I'm going to use Del Fresco strawberries here, which is an Ontario greenhouse grower. And we know there are a number of greenhouse growers in Ontario who are now doing strawberries and in the market 12 months of the year. And this is just one. But you can see when you look at their product that they're trying to educate people. And if you ask me, I think they actually could do more on their packaging about it. But on their website, you do see where they're talking about greenhouse grown locally, all natural, pure. They show that they're using ladybugs in terms of their pest management practices so that they can reduce the need for pesticides, and also how they're doing bumblebee pollination with bumblebees and some of those things. So I think they're trying to tell the story to customers and consumers, and it is a story that people want to hear, and they do place value on it. So don't just think that it's something you have to do, but turn it into something that can become either a point of differentiation for you or an opportunity perhaps to get into a new market, because there's some retailers who are actively looking for products that deliver sustainable practices. So that's where I'd like to maybe just take another pause, Emily, and see if we've got some questions on the telling the story or any of the things that I talked about. Sometimes it promotes conversation when we talk about product costs changing and some of those kind of things. So I'll just ask and see if we've got any questions again.
No, it seems you're doing too good of a job presenting and explaining because there's no questions again.
I'm not sure that everybody who would be there would agree with that, but that's good. I'm glad if people are getting it the way that we're sharing it. But I certainly, I do invite people, because this is sustainability is a complicated topic, and there are a lot of different ways to approach it. So we'll dive into packaging. And again, as Emily said earlier, if you have any questions, we'd be happy to entertain them. So packaging, and why is packaging in food perhaps more get more airtime or more in the news than some other sectors and that kind of thing? And I know I've heard people say before, well, there's actually more waste in packaging for some other products, and that, why do they target food and that kind of thing? And I think that the simple answer to that is because our products, food products, are coming into their house every single week, and every day people are going to their fridge or to their cupboard and they are using food products. So I think that it's just, we have to accept that although it's a privilege to have people purchase our products and take them home to their family, it's also puts us very high on the awareness list, and food is just top of mind. So we have to respect that we are always going to get pressure on our packaging, because people are opening the box, the bottle, the jar, whatever it is, and making a judgment about whether they think it's the right amount of packaging or the right type of packaging or too much or whatever it is. So I think that is the reality of being in the food industry. So it's also important to try to understand, what is the consumer, where's their head at on packaging and sustainability and cost and that kind of thing. So just wanted to share a chart from the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University, where they do a considerable amount of consumer research and share a lot of that with industry. So what you can see here on the graph is that overall, almost 90% of respondents believe plastic packaging should be changed to green alternatives, but not at an additional cost. So I guess that would be the ultimate, want their cake and eat it too, not in a plastic package. So we're seeing here that, and it's a relatively consistent from region to region. I think, it's Atlantic Canada is slightly lower, but the difference between 87 and 89 or 91 is not that great. So it's just, what we have to accept is that consumers are telling us they want it, but they're also telling us that they're not willing to pay a premium for it. So that can change. Consumer behavior does change over time. It can become more or less willing to pay a premium, but what they're telling us right now, roughly 9 out of 10 of them are saying that they don't want to see an additional cost. So when it comes to packaging, I think that it's important to understand that the retailers are on this issue. And I always try to look to what my perception would be the leaders in the industry, because they'll do things first. And so you can see a quote from Trader Joe's there that really suggests that, that they're listening to the consumers in their store, and because they want to be a great neighbor, so they respect their sort of position in the economy, taking a careful look at packaging, and that they're looking at opportunities to make improvements. So one thing about Trader Joe's is that probably 90 to 95% of what they sell would be private label, so it's their own brand. So they will be going to their suppliers and saying, we're hearing it from our consumers, we need you to make improvements with respect to sustainability. And it's not a commitment to move everything to no plastic or anything like that, but they're sending a message that says, you know what, this is important to us, and we're going to be coming to our suppliers to push for that. So, and also we know here at home that Sobeys in February, I believe, or March 1st, eliminated plastic bags from their stores and shifted all Sobeys stores across Canada to reusable bags. And so that's a pretty big decision in their business for them to do that, to say to consumers, sustainability is a big issue, and we've heard you. You're telling us plastic bags is not what you want, so we're going to expect that now you're going to bring your reusable bag to a Sobeys every time you come. They do have the paper bags as an option, but that we're going to make a big shift. And I think that was a bold move on Sobeys' part to do that. And some people may or may not remember, but Loblaw did do that a number of years ago, probably maybe 6-7 years ago now. They took 2 stores, one was Quinpool Road in Halifax, and they called it a bagless store. And I think that at the time, the way they promoted it was that they were Canada's first bagless grocery store. And they did this. And because they shifted back to offering plastic bags, although I don't know, I wasn't at the table at the time, but my perception would be that either their sales went down or consumers said to them, we don't like this decision, and they reversed it and put the plastic bags back. So perhaps they were before their time. We know that sustainability changes in terms of consumers' importance that they put on it. But anyway, it's something that it's important to know that the retailers are focused on it, and bags would be kind of their version of the packaging in their store. That they don't package all the different products, but they package your groceries on the way out the door. So that's something. Now, I think it's interesting to note that in the current environment that we're working in right now, the retailers are saying if you bring reusable bags, you're going to have to pack your own because of the concerns around employee safety, which I find it interesting, given that some people say that the impact of the coronavirus on the planet, because our economies have really dialed it back in terms of production and a lot of the things that we've been putting into the environment with regards to transportation and how it's hurting the environment, that this thing actually will have a positive impact on environment. But some of the initiatives that we've taken, like reducing packaging with bulk food and plastic or reusable shopping bags, we have to use differently because of it. So it's just incredible how our industry keeps having to change and respond to what's going on. So now, the packaging issue for a producer and a processor is a hugely complicated issue. It's not as simple as just to say, you need to go find a sustainable packaging. It's something you need to consider an awful lot of things when you're making these decisions. And some of the things that you need to consider would be, what new equipment do you need in your production or processing plant to handle this new packaging? So if you think about clamshells, for example, we see where plastic, single-use plastic clamshells are one of the things which we hear a lot of conversation about, where people say that's bad, we can't keep doing that. And if you're going to shift to some of the new either biodegradable or fully compostable options, it's a big change in equipment in your processing plant. You can't get that same kind of throughput. So that impacts the decision. We know that cost on product is on the packaging cost is important, and the impact that it will have on your finished cost. And as I shared earlier, consumers are telling us they don't want to pay the premium. So if the new package costs more, is somebody going to absorb that, or are we going to end up with a higher retail? I think sustainable packaging has an impact on your staff in terms of sometimes it could be how you harvest or what has to happen in the processing facility. So that is something you need to factor in. You need to factor in the merchandising at the store level. So what do these products look like? How do they perform? Do they stand up through the coolers and through refrigeration into say for a produce department, for example? Would it stand up and not absorb moisture and things like that? So how is it going to be merchandised in the store? The packing speed through your plant, so is that going to impact your product costs? So if right now you're able to pack 50 per minute and the new sustainable packaging only allows you to pack 40 per minute, then that has an impact on your cost. And one thing that I believe we should be more focused on is the total environmental footprint. And that, it does complicate the issue, but on the other side, I believe that's ultimately the right answer. So if you say bringing a plastic package produced in one part of the world, what's the footprint to bring it here, and what's the impact on the other end on recycling, and then what is that compared to, say, a fully compostable product, which requires cutting down trees or some other plant-based material, and is there more energy use? So I think there's a lot of different factors that go into it, and I'm not suggesting I probably have the answer, but I believe when we can get to the point where we look at the total environmental impact then or footprint, that it will give us a better idea of what is the right packaging. We also have to factor in food waste. We know that plastic, which has for a part of the population, a bad reputation, but it does protect the food that we produce and that we sell. So if more food was thrown in the compost because it couldn't make the journey through the supply chain to the shelf to the consumer, then will we have a different impact on the environment because we're producing food and it doesn't get consumed? There's waste there as well. So what impact does that have? And then also product quality. I mean, it's so important. Consumers have had a lot of great food available to them, and they have a certain level of expectation for quality. So we have to respect that part. Another issue on packaging is that we don't always control it. So this is something that was implemented in the US, where all of the large berry growers got together and said that they commit to having recycle ready packaging by, I believe it's 2025. So that's something that industry in the United States and other markets, you can see Chile on there as well, have made a commitment. And I would expect the customers and consumers in Canada would hold our producers and processors to that same standard. So they'll be coming to us and saying, what are you doing about it? I think we can't find solutions all at once. We have to look and say, what is one? So this is from a Farm Boy store in Ontario. So you can see where they're putting potatoes into a paper bag. Whether that, that's probably done at, whether it's done at store level, maybe it's done at the packer, but we can't find a solution for everything at once. And sometimes we have to try one item, see how it works, see whether there's a good or bad response, and learn from it. Another thing that's important on packaging is to really understand the recycling capabilities in your market. And it's something that's much more fragmented than what I would have expected when I started learning about it. So the capabilities in Halifax are very different than the capabilities in Moncton, or different than the capabilities in Toronto. So we really need to try to figure out what's going to happen on the other end to our packaging. And it's not the same in every market. So it's something to be aware of. Another initiative, this extended producer responsibility, where there's been a shift in Ontario, British Columbia as well. So you can see the quote where it's really forcing the packaging industry to take ownership for the packaging right through till what they call end of life, which is either when it can be composted or recycled or if it's waste. And they're really putting a lot of emphasis and focus on packaging producers. But if you are a seller of goods into these markets, you need to be aware of that happening and what your responsibility is part of that value chain. And perhaps some of these things sell. I mean, when I find things like this in the stores where you see a paper fiber package of laundry detergent on the shelf right beside a pretty much identical size product for a huge premium, that product wouldn't have been on the shelf a number of years ago. But if consumers are saying we're willing to buy it and we're willing to pay that premium, then that's a big shift in the marketplace, and something that it might not be in every category and it might not be every consumer, but some retailer has decided that that's worth giving it a shot. So that product probably wouldn't have come to the market without the sort of emphasis or the focus on sustainability that we're seeing. And even when you see some of these kind of things, so who would have thought that a Kit Kat chocolate bar is using sustainably sourced cocoa as a point of differentiation? And it just shows you how this issue is top of mind for consumers. And if you're walking by in the grocery store, and then maybe that's going to get you to buy a chocolate bar, which is different than maybe the other reasons that you would have a year ago. So it's interesting to see where somebody's promoting a chocolate bar and with a website called unwrapsomegood.ca around a chocolate bar. I find it interesting that people are working in that stream. And we're seeing a lot of innovation in packaging. So this is something from Howlings, which is a hothouse grower on the West Coast. And they have done a partnership with Appeal to produce a food grade sleeve on English cucumbers to eliminate the plastic. And, even though the plastic on an English cucumber you think is not that much, but it adds up. And when you look at how they're promoting the decision, they're doing it, and obviously this is for product that they would be selling in the US, but by eliminating the plastic sleeve on their English cucumbers, it's the equivalent of eliminating 85 million straws or wrapping the Empire State Building 7 times. So they're trying to give the consumer something to grasp onto that they can relate to about how big a decision it is. And that goes back to that telling the story and sharing with people and turning it into more than just the right thing to do, but also trying to turn it into a sales opportunity. So Emily, I know we have some questions there now. I think I see a few, so we'll take a pause there and maybe we can address some of those questions.
Yep, there's a few here. So we'll start with the first one, and it is, what percentage of our food comes from the US?
That's a question I was trying to find an answer for recently, given all of our challenges with the coronavirus and the condition we see our stores with some holes and that kind of thing. So I couldn't find a definitive answer, but what I could gather from different sources, and this is an estimate, it's not something that is that I can add up a bunch of numbers and give you a specific answer, but my estimate is that probably about 30% of our food in Canada comes from the US. And I would say if you want to kind of look at, it's probably about 40% total comes from other countries, but 30% would be from the US. And that's, again, it's an estimate, but that's the best estimate that I could get right now.
Okay. Next question is, why do retailers want very conservative best before dates, which result in acceptable food going to waste?
Yes, the best before date is an interesting addition to the food and addition, not spelled with an E, but an addition to the food industry in, we'll call it relatively recent years. I would say that it's they're trying to reduce the risk is what they're trying to do, and they're saying that they would rather err on the side of of the product performing at its best as opposed to slightly less than the best. But I would say that for suppliers, that most of the time retailers would want to use the expertise of the supplier. Now, they want the food to perform properly, and they would always push you on that. But I have not, in my experience, had too many conversations where a retailer is saying you should change your best before date to be tighter. I would say that now, if that's the case, it'd be interesting to understand some examples of that. But I would say that it's more the retailers should be bowing to the expertise of the producer processor to find the right date. And it's not always totally spoiled. It's also when the product doesn't perform as well. But it is, I don't think there's a definitive line there. And I would always try to bring the facts and we call it the science to the conversation on that question.
Okay, next question. What do you think is going to happen to the market after COVID-19? Are more people going to buy local?
That's a big question, but I do believe that we're going to see a big shift in the consumer basket with this issue that we're facing right now. I think that one of my contentions often, and perhaps sometimes I get a bit on the soapbox about it, but is I don't think people give food producers, food production, processing enough importance. And one of the things I kind of talk about sometimes is the fact that even I'm guilty of it. I leave the house some days, and when I leave, I kind of have a little checklist in my mind that says, okay, do I have my phone? Do I have my car keys? And do I have my wallet? Because those are the essentials of life. And if I have those, then I'm good. And I have to make myself stop and say, Peter, those are not the essentials of life. The essentials of life are food and some of those type of things. So an iPhone is not the essential of life. So I think that to answer your question, I believe we're going to see a shift to a lot more focus on food, because people are now looking at, they're going to be more constrained for money, a lot of people, because it's having a devastating effect on employment. And I think people are going to really look at the food they're buying, and we're going to see some disruptions in our supply network. And we're going to see where it's going to be challenging probably to get some products from different parts of the world, because this is a world issue. And if you know, the Italian economy right now, from my understanding, is almost closed. So things like olive oil that we would have got from Italy in containers and would have ordered them and said, okay, we have a 8-week lead time to get that on a boat and get it into Canada and into the warehouse and distributed to stores. That's going to change in I'm calling it the medium term now, because I think this is more than what we would call a short-term issue. So we're going to see some disruption, and people are then going to be forced to look and say, well, what are the alternatives to some of those products? And if you look at a category like deli or cheese, for example, where we sell a lot of imported products, I think that we're going to see a shift where people are going to see an opportunity for some more domestic products to get some exposure, and people try them, because we're creatures of habit. We buy what we did buy. And so they're going to say, hey, this product might not be available for a period of time. I'm going to shift to another one. So as much as it's going to be disruption, I do believe it is an opportunity. And I think we will see a shift to more local and more awareness around what a long-term sustainable, viable food industry in our province, region, country means to us. So Emily, sorry, that was a long answer to that one. I get on a soapbox sometimes, but I did try to sum it up, and I do believe we're going to see a shift. And for local producers and processors who can get their products to market, I think it can be an opportunity for them.
No, I think it was an excellent answer. The next question here is, any tips on how to market sustainability in the production process to the end consumer, on the packaging or via a marketing plan? And I would like to say quickly that we had a two-part series, or a part of this series, a two-part webinar that was on just using packaging for branding and for marketing. And that is already on our YouTube channel under the Take Your Product to Market series. And that was with Daryl Monroe of Bounce Creative, and his focus is on branding and packaging. But Peter, how would you answer that on tips on how to market sustainability?
Yes, and I know, Emily, from watching those webinars, there were some great examples there on that, and I would recommend for sure for people to check that out. I think what you have to remember about packaging is that it's like a billboard. People only see it for a fleeting moment when they're going by. There's 35,000 items in an average grocery store in our market. So you have to find that way of delivering a very, very quick and concise message that will resonate with them. You can't make it too complicated. They're not going to get it if it's too complicated. So you want to find those quick things that you can communicate that are going to resonate. And I also recommend that people go back, and you have to start with the definition of your consumer. So who's going to be the one buying your product, and then what is going to resonate with them? And so if there's somebody who's going to either reach for a product that's sustainably sourced over one that's not, or a product that is organic over one that's not, or there's different ways that you can differentiate. So go back to that definition of your consumer, really figure out who that is, and then find a very, very simple, concise message that's going to resonate with them. That if you show somebody the product for about 2 seconds or 3 seconds, that they get it. And then that's what's going to be the hook for them to stop. And you can do more detail, but you got to get the hook that's going to stop them.
Thanks. The next question is, do you think there is a market for home delivery?
There is a market for home delivery. The biggest challenge is that it's so closely related to population density. And I believe in the current environment we're operating in, where in the Maritimes, or even maybe I'll use a Canadian number, where probably less than 2% of the market would have been, probably less than 3% were doing online shopping, and probably less than 1% were actually getting delivery, because it's really not offered in that many markets yet. But now we believe that number is probably north of 10%. So because people don't want to be in the grocery stores, we're being told to stay at home and not go out. So we've had a whole new part of the market that's been exposed to online shopping. And I would use our own experience here that we've been much more in tune with that than we would have in the past. And so I think that the challenge with home delivery is finding the efficiencies that you can get so that it's profitable. And it's being able to balance the cost of picking the order, delivering the order for a price that somebody is willing to pay. And I think right now, there's people who are willing to pay a bigger premium than there was a month ago. So it's certainly more of an opportunity. But when society figures out how to try to either live with a new reality, or perhaps come up with a solution to the virus challenges, then will that subside a little bit when people are more willing to go out and that kind of thing. So, but the biggest challenge is trying to find that sweet spot where you have a cost structure that will be covered by the consumer.
Yeah, and I've noticed a lot of the local companies have been offering home delivery lately, or even curbside pickup. So you can go to their location and they'll put it just outside the store. So there's no interaction with people, and it's been, I think, very successful so far for a lot of them.
Yeah, it's forced us to operate differently, and that's, as devastating as all of what's going on in the world is right now. There are things that it does force us to change, and I think it will probably bring some new things to the surface, that how we can sort of operate, and you see people doing free delivery now, so they're more trying to incorporate it into their cost of goods. And because I think consumers sometimes, they look at it and they go, oh, $8 for delivery, I'm not sure I'm going to pay it. But the other thing we're seeing a huge amount, and there was a big shift in food service where people were willing to pay for delivery, where sometimes the cost of the delivery was equal to the cost of the food in some cases. So.
Okay, and just one last question here before you can wrap things up, Peter.
Mm-hmm.
So this question is, so we produce meat and eggs. One area that I sometimes struggle with packaging is vacuum packed meat. I'm very much for it as opposed to paper because it keeps the meat longer in the freezer. But a public perception is that paper is better for the environment than plastic. Would you have an example of what we should be promoting when we compare less food waste versus single-use plastic?
So I'm trying to think if I can come up with an example right here. But what I would tell you is that it's so much about telling the story. So that's where if we can get people to understand the entire decision or what all of the factors that need to go into that decision would be. Now, one example, which I kind of was thinking of starting to use a little more, is actually the egg carton. And I don't think that an egg carton was designed out of fiber way back when because it was a sustainable solution. I don't know who sort of developed the egg carton and figured that one out, but I do believe that it's a great example of a compostable solution where we probably could have very easily gone to plastic, but we kept it on the sustainable side. So that's one example. But what you're asking is more, how do we educate people about the right packaging to protect the product? And I think that that's, I'm not sure I can come up with an exact example right now. I'll have to maybe think about that one, Emily, and see if maybe I'm going to have to come back and say I have to send an email and say if I can come up with an example, or maybe somebody on the call has an example of one where we're seeing that sort of plastic packaging, which people definitely see as being, certain part of the population seeing as being wrong, but in the end, because it protects the food and reduces food waste and extends the shelf life of products, that it may be that we have to tell that story better. So
yeah, at the end of the presentation here, Peter's contact information will be on the screen. So if you want to get in contact with him for any specific questions there, his email will be at the end. And I will say for telling the story through your packaging, definitely check out the 2-part series with Daryl Monroe, because he did have really great examples there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we can just wrap things up here, Peter.
Okay, did you want me to talk about that last one about prices or not?
Oh, yeah, there's a couple more that came in.
Yeah. So
yeah, do you
ahead.
think food prices are going up is the other question.
I believe that food is very much, I'm not an economist, but food is supply and demand. And I believe that we will have some challenges with supply on certain categories. So I do believe that we will see some increases in food pricing. And listening to producers and processors that are in our region or even in Canada, I think that there's a lot of challenges of operating right now in terms of labor and working, giving people a safe working environment. So we're going to be challenged to produce perhaps as much. I don't think that people will, I don't believe we'll be in a position where there is not enough food, but I do believe that that we will see some changes in pricing as a result. And our Canadian dollar will have another impact on that, which has decreased in value in the last 3 weeks. So that has an impact on the product that comes into the country as well.
Absolutely, thanks.
All right, so I'm just going to summarize things quickly here. In terms of sustainability, we talked about food waste and the fact that there's a lot of emphasis on trying to reduce those numbers. And as producers and processors, we have to figure out, you know, what can we do? And I would recommend you have a benchmark that you kind of look and say, okay, here's what it is in our business now. What could we do? What are the possibilities? And try to have those conversations with your customers and try to figure out where are the opportunities to reduce food waste. And in the end, it's the right decision to do. So how can you tackle it and try to tell the story as well? Production and processing, we see a lot of different initiatives going on related to sustainability, as it's such a big issue. And my biggest point there is just to remember to tell the story. Don't just do it, but tell the story and tell it over and over and over again so that people get it, what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that's for your customers and for consumers. And sometimes the story has to be a little bit different for each one, because your customer is going to be more interested in impact on cost, and your consumer is going to be more interested in, is it sort of relatable to things they want to see happening. And then we talked a lot about packaging, and that's a big nut to crack for people in the food industry. I think it will always be an issue for consumers because they see our products in their house every week, every day. So we have to do things that will address some of those concerns. But don't forget about how your packaging can also be that help to tell your story and let consumers know what's going on and why you're doing the things you're doing. And I think in the end, they will give you credit for that. So lots going on with sustainability. And I think that it's one of those issues that continues to be at the top of sort of on people's mind as it relates to food. And as we change, it will continue to change too. So you have to stay on top of those trends and watch what people are doing all the time and keep on top of it as it impacts your category and your products. So. And Emily, if there's any more questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. But that was the information that I wanted to share about sustainability.
Perfect. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for teaching us about sustainability in relation to the food industry. If you have any other questions that weren't answered during the session, Peter, if you could just put up our contact information on the screen. Yes, feel free to email either of us with your questions. And if you could use the subject line, Food Sustainability Webinar, we will get back to you as soon as we can. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. Peter and I hope to see you all again next Thursday, April 9th at noon, to learn about selecting a distributor and broker. You can find this information on our website. And I'm just going to share my screen quickly here.
So I have to stop mine then, Emily.
Yep, I think it's up now.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just a flyer for our next series. Perennia is going to continue the weekly webinars Thursdays at noon with our next series, Idea to Market. I hope you'll join Gary Morton of Morton Horticultural Associates and I to learn about the Idea to Market Success Map for new food product development. Feel free to reach out to me directly with any questions on that series. And the next one for next Thursday is ending off the Take Your Product to Market series with Peter Chapman again. Okay, thanks everybody for coming. And again, feel free to let us know if you have any questions. And we look forward to seeing you next week.